Hello, everyone. I'm putting together a follow up from our training from a week ago. So, what I like to do after having a program like that, we spent 4 hours together looking at accountability and showing up and taking time to reflect and being clear on purpose and priorities. So, I always realize there's so many things we covered in 4 hours. I like to do a short video follow up just to give some reminders. And I'd suggest to you, the one thing out of the training that really speaks to you now is the one thing to focus on. If you try to focus on everything, that's pretty much a formula not to make progress. So that's back to that whole idea of essentialism. If you're not disciplined in the pursuit of the essential, you'll be indisciplined in the pursuit of more. So pick one thing that spoke to you. So I'm just going to go through quickly. There's certain general ideas behind everything we did and we talked about. So the first one is the idea of, it's not so much reputation, but really reliability, dependability, accountability, who you are. And we began by that whole notion of showing up. 80% of success is showing up. And as I shared with you, when I saw that quote, I realized that everybody shows up. I've got friends that I can count on them to always be too busy to talk. I've got friends I can count on them to interrupt. I've got friends I can count on getting together. We're going to have a good laugh together. I have people I know that if something came up, they'd be there for me in a heartbeat in my life. And so the two pieces that really speak to me in this training is one of them, we always show up, and without opening our mouth, our face communicates a message and people respond to who we are in the moment. And that who we are in the moment is the part that we have some influence over. The second part of that is when I shared the idea. I remember having many conversations with my friend Steffi Allen, who was concerned that people talked about being too busy to have time to reflect. And immediately I think of the quote from Einstein that definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you don't have time to reflect and contemplate, then you're doomed to repeat. And people blame time, like I was too busy. Well, time's not making your choices for you. So I remember this quote from a book on parenting that talks about children growing up. And they said, first you form your habits, then your habits form you. And what that means is if your habits are operating, you're on automatic pilot. And I've seen this figure for decades talking about thoughts, the amount of thoughts people have in a day. And to this day, even though I've known it for 25, 30 years, it still strikes me that we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, however they calculate that. But what strikes me is that 90 to 95% of them are the same one we had yesterday, which means to some extent running on automatic pilot. Now, if you don't have time to stop and reflect and ponder and contemplate, then you're stuck. And what happens when you're stuck is the thing that will get you to move, typically in America, is crisis. So rather than having a crisis, how do we take time to reflect and contemplate on who I am, who I choose to be, what impact my presence is having? So one of the examples I shared with you is a project I did years ago with a group of county clerks where they had issues with difficult people and they wanted to do another training. They've already done 3 trainings. And so as I talked to them, we got clear that, okay, the training you've done really hasn't taken. The second thing is difficult people are not going to go away. So the thing you have control over is how you respond, not how you react, because that happens so quickly, you're already out of control. But how do you respond? Choosing your response is something that takes contemplation time. So sitting back, having some reflection, well, wait a minute, who was I in that moment? Who do I choose to be? How could I operate differently? They're having a rough day. I'm here to be able to help them. How would I rather respond than react? And so a big part of this whole process is, what Milton Erickson talked about, allowing yourself to see the things you don't allow yourself to see. So that takes pondering. Now, whether or not you're aware of it, who you are speaks so loudly, people can't hear what you're saying. And that who you are, when we get busy, it's like, well, I can't help myself. I'm too busy. I've got too much stuff going on. Yeah, you can help yourself, but not if you blame busy and don't build in time. And so, I read a lot of material. I see videos and interviews about highly successful people who take time every single day to sit back and be quiet and reflect. So they might, some people take Saturday until 2 o'clock. Some people take 45 minutes in the morning. And what reflection is that right brain activity that's not goal driven, it's not trying to control, manage, manipulate. Left brain is decisive and it's uncomfortable with not knowing, so it has a tendency to jump to conclusions rather than pondering. What are you moving toward? What's the highest version of yourself? What is something that's going on in your life that you would prefer to not have going on? And what can you do to change it? And then again, this little reminder, it's really impossible to stop something because that's where all your attention goes. But if you decide you're going to stop something, but you're going to do something different in its place, now you have a new behavior to move towards. And if you don't have a new behavior, there's no vacuum. You'll go back to what you've always done. So a couple of pieces we talked about. This is the sphere of influence. And it really speaks to paying attention to that inner circle in your world where you have the ability to control and influence what you put your attention on. And the more you focus on the things you can influence, the more your influence grows. But when you focus on the outside, so here's priorities, attitudes, clarity. When you focus on the outside and you blame the world for what you're doing, people are jerks, you can't trust people, it's the economy, it's the blah, 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 then the less your influence, the less you have control over your influence. That's really another way of describing being a victim of circumstance. And so focusing on the things outside and, oh my God, oh, how terrible, it gives you up your ability to control and influence. So the other part of this process is the most powerful and frequently used medium of communication is your face. Without opening your mouth, you're communicating something. People pick it up, they start reading it. And a part of that is that quote from Emerson, who you are speaks so loudly. But the other part is that whatever you're communicating is infectious. You pass it on. It spreads to other people. So looking at this woman from the streets in Guanajuato, just an absolutely delightful human being, friendly, jovial, playful, alive, light, completely comfortable buying food from her. And she's contagious. She's emotionally contagious. So you feel, when you have an emotional contagion, you feel the emotion that the person around you is feeling that they're sending to you, and you automatically tend to stop and respond to that. And there is a process neurologically and emotionally that happens called the mirror neurons, that when you see a behavior in somebody else, or you see an attitude, you see a reaction, you see a mindset, the mirror neurons start firing as if that same process is going on within you, and then immediately you start feeling the same thing that you're observing. So in that way, you're constantly contagious. So the next big piece we jumped into is the golden circle, starting with your why. And essentially, it parallels what we just talked about, that the inner circle, which very few people know anything about, is the why. And that is like, what's the inner purpose, the cause, the value that you're living that drives your behavior. It's the thing that makes you excited to get up in the morning, as opposed to the what, which is the outer circle, which is what most business is based upon. So if you have a what, then you're constantly selling and trying to market and advertise. But when you have a why, people go, oh, I get a feeling for who you are. So the what is the outside stuff. It's the action that you take. It's the products you produce. The how is how you go about doing things when you're at your best. So for me, I like to take time and ponder. I mind map. I took big pictures. I look at pieces together. I look for principles that are generalizable to multiple aspects of a person's life. And how I do that is just being clear on being in integrity and being genuine, and actually being clear on my purpose first. Because, if I had words coming out of my mouth that were incongruent with my behavior, you would never believe the words, you believe the behavior. So this little example, this is the story about the Chinese ideograms, where they got people together twice. The first time they showed them ideograms, brought them back a week later and asked them to identify the ones they'd seen before. And their accuracy was just hopeless. It was just completely random. The second group came in and they looked at them. And when they came back the second time, they said, okay, would you look at these ideograms? Some of them you've seen before, some of them you haven't. But as you look at them, please notice which ones make you feel good or which one you like. And the feeling state was what was incredibly accurate. Now, again, feeling is right hemisphere. It's not left brain. It's not analytical. Feeling is that place where you just know this thing feels right to me. So that's part of my general advice, is training yourself to think less and to feel more. And we all did that as children, but we've kind of forgot. So this is part of that whole reflection process of working with the why. If you go through it analytically, you'll never find it. Because analytical is words, words is left hemisphere, and that's not where feeling resides. So the exercises we did had to do with finding those moments in your life, whether, as a childhood or as a work experience, where you lost track of time, you're completely immersed in what you're doing, you feel so alive and connected with what you're doing. In Simon's words, if you could do this for the rest of your life and experience this the rest of your life, you'd be the happiest human being on the planet. That's a feeling. So the rest of this is in the material that you had. Part of the process of discovering why may come from the hows. So when you do the why, you have one why. And when you do the hows, you might have 4 or 5. But it is, how do you go about what you're doing when you're wholeheartedly involved and engaged? Do you work alone? Do you work with people? Do you like to be very detailed? Do you like to be a big picture? Do you like to interact? Is communication important to you? Is silence important to you? So how is it that you're working when you're at your best? And then underneath that is, again, that why. That's the driver. So a couple of pieces to wrap that up. One of them was the work from Greg McKeown, where he found out that success had a tendency to breed failure. And his description of that is that when you're working on a business the first time, you're very disciplined in pursuing what's essential. Once you've been successful, you get a little bit more bold and you say, okay, we're going to do these 9 things, where when you did it before, you did 4 things. So the whole notion is, when you're disciplined in the pursuit of the essential, you're going to be doing less but better. When you're undisciplined in the pursuit of the essential, you'll be doing a lot more and not be very fulfilled. And so, we have kind of a tendency to live in a more society. So if you know what's in integrity and alignment with you, and you come from that feeling place and you're aligned with that, you're much more likely to be walking every day, living in alignment with your purpose and feeling a sense of thriving in your life rather than just surviving. Okay, so thriving, prospering, flourishing, balance in your life, activities that you engage in that are refreshing and fulfilling. So I didn't get a chance to show this in the training, but this always speaks to me. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with this one wild and precious life of yours? So I live by that as much as I can. And this quote really speaks to me. I share this really often. People ask me, I live a different lifestyle. You know that if you work with me, and I'm really clear on the choices that I make, and I do those based upon what really feels right. And people like, well, you're so lucky. I'm like, well, no, I make different choices. And part of mine is based upon the notion from years ago of going through the motions, working too much, being on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and realizing, wait a minute, if this is going to change, it's up to me. And then getting exposed to Wayne Dyer, Leo Buscaglia, and Gene Houston, and Virginia Satir, and a number of people early on that were people who, when they talked, they were in integrity with what they said and they really believed it. And then working with the Native Americans, where they talked about, the Native American idea of spirituality is, look, it's not a church or a box you go to. Our spirituality is what you believe and what you choose to live every minute, every hour, every day. And so that's why this quote sticks with me, is I just keep making a choice. It's like, what does it mean for me to be living well? And that's it. That's a summary of our time together. I'm going to put together a little PDF that I'll see if I can attach it to the video. But it's just great. I feel really blessed to be able to do this work. And hopefully you found something that inspires you, that touches and nourishes a part of your life, and you can bring it alive and live even richer experience. So thank you very much. Blessings. Bye.